So you've heard about gossip and you've heard about slander. Those are a couple of the things that we don't talk about a whole lot in the church. Maybe it's because too many people participate in them, and those are not things that you want to talk about if you're doing them yourself. But have you ever thought about how gossip and slander are related to directly in the New Testament and maybe even the Old Testament to the demonic realm and the underworld? That's what we're going to talk about today on the Reformed Fringe. I'm your host, Doug Van Dorn, and the pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado. We've recently moved locations, only about 5 miles away from where we were before. With me is John Moffitt. John, you're back again. And he is the pastor out at Grace Reformed Church out in, where are you at? Spring Hill.
Spring Hill, just south
Spring Hill, Tennessee. And, we were talking about this as a topic a couple of days ago, John, because you preached a couple of sermons on this, and I thought, well, this could be a great episode for both of our shows. So we're going to put this into two different shows. This will be part one. It goes on the Fringe, and part two, if you guys will come back, it will go on Theocast. So, John, why don't you kind of walk us through kind of why you went into two sermons talking about this topic, what's the topic, and then maybe we'll get into some of the New Testament verses about it.
Yeah, for sure. So every summer I always take a break of whatever book we're in. So right now we're in Genesis. I just finished Tower of Babel, chapter 11. And I guess it's been a habit I picked up. I don't know. It might have been advice in seminary. I picked up the habit somewhere. I can't remember. But to do theological studies, like to take breaks from books just to give people a chance to breathe a little bit. And for years and years, we've either done something on the church or the doctrine of God. We've kind of rotated back and forth. And so this year, we did Doctrine of God last year. We did Ordinary Means of Grace. So we did preaching, the Lord's table, baptism, prayer, fellowship, things like that. So this year I decided to do something I had never done before, and I wanted to do something on unity and what causes disunity. So what actually creates unity and the focal point of that, and then what causes disunity. And in my research of doing that, and I was shocked how often the Bible connected the disunity of the church to some kind of a demonic, some kind of satanic influence. And so it was took me a long time to prepare for these sermons. Topical sermons, I think, are the hardest. I don't know about you, Doug, but those are, they're really hard because you just have to decide how much of this topic am I going to bite off. And so the first sermon I preached was about how God uses grace. And my argument is that often when we think about the word grace, we always just disconnect it from its definition. And the way in which the New Testament writers write that grace is a person. When grace appeared is how Titus describes it. When grace appears in chapter 2, he's saying that you cannot disassociate grace from Jesus. Because sometimes grace kind of just means like, oh, well, God just kind of forgave you. It's like, no, the package of grace is Jesus. And so in that particular passage in Titus, we looked at how Paul says that grace is the thing that saves you. Jesus, the person, saves you. And then he is the one who sanctifies you. It literally says that grace trains us unto godliness. I love that passage in Titus. It's amazing. Grace trains us unto, and then later on, it talks about how grace is the unifying factor, that if me as a sinner has been saved and I'm being trained to be like Christ, then I'm going to be naturally unified within and this is why the body, the language of a body. So you have all these different people who are now living on each other, right? Like we're all connected and there's this spiritual connection. And so the argument was that the church becomes the most safe and wonderful and powerful place in the planet that's full of nasty, horrible things because it's all centered around the person and work of Jesus Christ. Now, the way I ended that sermon was, unfortunately, Satan knows just how powerful, because we are the we are the proclaimers of the gospel, right? We are to be discipling people to proclaim Christ. This is what the Great Commission is all about. So if he can get us fighting and the church is unsafe, then all of a sudden it's no longer a place where discipleship is happening. It's no longer a place where people are becoming trained how to preach the gospel, and people are living in sin and not set free from their sin. So what I did is a bunch of research, and Sermon 2 is what we wanted to talk about here. I did a bunch of research about the New Testament. So there's 27 books in the New Testament. If you look at, do a research, you will find that 24 of the 27 books will talk about, specifically talk about what causes fractions or what causes divisions within the community of Christ, the body of Christ. So think about that. Not half the New Testament, all of the New Testament, but 3 books. Peter, I want to say Philemon, and one of John's books. I think it's like 3rd John. Mm-hmm. Now, all of Paul's letters, Paul wrote 13 letters, all 13 of Paul's letters deal with this issue, division in the church. Every single one of them. So when you think about how important that is to Paul, when people just say, Doug, when they say things like, we just need to get back to the New Testament church. I'm like, no, we don't. We need to be the farthest thing from the New Testament church because they didn't figure it out. Maybe one church, the Church of Philippi, may be the only church who got it right. You know what I mean? And then later on, John's like, and they lost their first love. And so they didn't even last. When I look at it, Paul has a lot to say about spiritual warfare. When you think about how many times, not only in these 13 letters, you can go through and look in these letters, and we're going to do this in a minute, how many times Paul equates divisiveness within the church to Satan or demonic forces or the devil. These are the words that he's using. And it's not kind of abstract. He says these actions are associated with this satanic or demonic influence or presence, or he'll say the way of. Like if it's one thing to say, hey, that's not very good. It's another thing to say that's satanic. You know, can you imagine someone walking up to you, Doug, and you said something out of your mouth, and this dear old lady comes up to you and goes, hey, Doug, that was satanic. You'd be like, that? You just went from 0 to 100, man. What do you mean? Well, this is what Paul does. He will describe events, and he doesn't say that that's just bad and it's not helpful for the unity of the church. He's saying you are taking that which is to be the farthest thing from this body and bringing it into the body, and that thing is going to cause division. We know that he wants to destroy. He wants to be deceitful. Paul warns us about there being false teachers. Here's the illustration that I ended up using, Doug. I said, if somebody ended up manifesting a demon, like let's just use some of the illustrations in the Old Testament, right, where they're like busting chains, or there's some kind of an illness. Like it's a clear, we would call it a Hollywood manifestation, and everybody in the church now sees it. So I've got a church of 100-something people sitting in my congregation, and all of a sudden this event starts happening, and we'd be all pretty freaked out, And so, how many people would probably leave my church because of that? None. They'd be freaked out about it, but it wouldn't be like, I can't go to that church. There was somebody who was manifesting a demon. You know what I'm saying? It might actually cause my church to grow. Like, whoa, man, the guy was preaching the gospel, and then all of a sudden, this demon started screaming out of this girl, and it was wild. And you should come back next week and see if it happens. Like, you see what I'm saying? Or if all of a sudden, books are flying in the foyer, they're flying all over the place. People will be like, whoa, man, Satan's really at work here. Like that kind of stuff I don't think is going to cause my church to empty out the pews. But the thing that does, and I asked this at a men's group recently, and I just being in ministry as long as I've been in, and Doug, as long as you've been in ministry, the number that I have feel is that as I talk to people, about 90% of people that I meet and talk to have been hurt by some kind of church.
When you say hurt by
for some reason,
church, what do you
mean?
And
I don't like the church that they were attending did something that was mean, offensive, or abusive, or harmful to them. Whether it was the pastor or whether it was another congregant, some kind of the hurt came with inside the church, not outside the church.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Whether it could be someone turned on them, someone cheated on them, someone lied to them. They felt abandoned. They felt like, hey, I have a pain and hurt, and no one was there to help me. I had to carry this. The hurt is associated with the church, right? So so when I finally went down that train, I wanted to go in and say, okay, well, what seems to be the culprit? Like, where do you see the majority of this happening as it relates to Paul? And he's saying these things, and I'll just state this up front. This is kind of the supernatural blurry side of this. The argument I'm making is that I don't think in the even in the early church, and I think even today's church, that Satan's biggest works are like some kind of a weird demonic manifestation. I think it is turning the hearts of God's people against each other through sinful means. And that is a power. And so when this happens, like we don't obey, we don't listen, and we don't participate as we should, Paul and James are saying that is the work of Satan inside the congregation to divide the congregation, right? So that's the premise, and then we can look into some passages.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good lead in to thinking about what the New Testament has to say about some of these things. I know you have a bunch of texts to look at, so why don't you just read off a couple of them and show us how they're connected, how these two things are connected. The tongue, slander, gossip, tearing people down, all this kind of stuff, and demonic activity.
Mm-hmm. So we're not going to get to it in this episode. We're going to do it in mine. We're going to talk about kind of where this stuff comes from, but the evidences of it. So what's crazy, Doug, is that I am still growing as a pastor in this area. Because James has shocked me. This is a phrase I've been saying lately. I believe in demons, but I don't. Like, theologically, they're there, but practically, I really don't think they're there. And James and Paul have really kind of rocked me lately. So listen to this. This is James in chapter 3, and I think James is a very kind shepherd, and we'll get into this in the next episode. But James definitely comes, as I like to say, elbows high in the paint. He's coming for your nose, and he doesn't mince words, and it's a shorter epistle, but he gets direct to the point. Here's an example. They're dealing with how he's dealing with how they're talking with each other, and the way that they're talking is definitely coming from jealousy and selfishness. They're using gossip and slander. So he says this, and the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. By the way, I think that fire has a double entendre, a double meaning. I'll explain to you here in a minute. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. Do you see how he just goes ahead and just ties it in there? Like the scorching nature and how it's staining and hurting the body, it's because the source is hell. That's the source of it. So now you could just say, well, John, that's making a little bit of a stretch, right? Like, what do you mean? Yeah, sure, he's just saying these are like bad things. Okay, keep reading. But if you have, this is James 3:14 through 16, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. Now, notice how he words this. He says this is earthly, it's a part of the world. Well, we know God, that Satan is the God of this world. He says it's unspiritual, that your actions are nothing reflecting who Christ is. And then he says demonic. So, Doug, like in your mind, when you hear that, what's coming to mind when he says bitter jealousy and selfish ambition is demonic?
We'll wait a little bit later to fully answer that question when we get to the Old Testament, because it's very interesting. But you're reading.
Okay. Yeah, you've got some mystery passage you won't share with me, and I'm like,
but James 3:6, what you just read, talks about the tongue being a fire set on fire by hell. And then this verse is talking about something that's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Demonic and hell are tied together. So you're dealing with something that's coming from the underworld, something that's coming from the place that we associate with the devil himself. And I do think that there's more going on there, but James is, because I think James is actually pulling this out of some Old Testament context. But I mean, he's directly tying this to hellish language. And, you know, there's a verse that struck me that's right kind of before this that makes me wonder. I've not done a deep study on James. I haven't preached it yet. We did do it at seminary years ago, but we didn't look into the kinds of things we look at on this show. But think about this. Look at the ships also, for they are also so large, they are driven by strong winds. They are guided by a very small rudder whenever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member. It boasts of great things. And I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, James is writing to the diaspora of Jews that are all over, Christians that are all over the ancient Greek world. And very closely tied to hell is also the ship that takes you over to it. And so it just makes me wonder, does he have something going on when he's talking about that? I don't know. But in the verses that you brought up, at the very least, it's overt, you know, demonic and hell.
Yeah. That's right. So, and what I think is interesting is that James's response is not get control of your tongue. Well, we're going to get into this, but the reason I mention this, he says, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. So it's like, do you understand that you don't even have the power to get in control of this? It's a demonic power, and you don't even have the power to get control of it, which is a terrifying thing to think about.
Yeah, these things of strife and jealousy and slander and gossip and so many things. These are destructive things that he is not just, he's not saying that these are just things that people do. He's saying this comes from hell itself. It's terrifying.
That's right. So
and when I hear sermons on,
so I'm going to save
this topic, I don't really ever hear them connecting those things to the underworld.
No. And, you know, because the fear is like, well, the devil made me do it. You know, the devil made me do it. And, you know, we don't want to give too much credence and credibility to the devil. And I love what James is doing here, because he's pointing out how bad this is. Like, this is really bad. Like, when you're not just having a squabble, you're not just having a disagreement. Like, this is of the opposite of what our God and King is. And it's not just bad. This is of the underworld, like using language of demonic and hell. And he even just finishes the whole thing when he gets into chapter 4. Listen how he responds, because remember I told you earlier, he says that you can't change this on your own. He tells you how you're going to end up changing. He says this in chapter 4, verse 6, but he gives more grace. Grace, as I said earlier, grace is that thing that is supposed to be driving your heart and your affections. We're going to get in this next episode. So he says this, therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So finally, to the person who says, I am nothing, I am not better than anyone else, because this is what's happening. They're creating caste systems. They're using their mouth to tear down because they think they're above. And he says, grace comes to the person who finally says, I am a nobody. And if it's not for God's grace in my life, I am not even going to be able to control my tongue. Here's why he holds the church accountable. Right here. Submit yourselves, therefore, to this God who gives you grace. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So if we take chapters 1 through 4, Doug, he is saying, when you participate in this, you're actually welcoming. I don't even understand how this works. Don't ask me to explain it. I don't know. Other than I'm taking James at his word. He is saying, when you act this way, you are in some way welcoming the presence of the devil into your congregation.
You brought up the devil made me do it. That is an attempt to get yourself off the hook. James is not doing that. Mm-hmm. He's saying you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart. So you need to give no opportunity for the devil. And the implication is that if you do give opportunity for the devil, it's not the devil made you do it. It's that you went down there to go shake his hand and make a deal with him.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the scary part about this is that again, the response is so important. We'll get to that. A couple other ones. This is in the same concept of where you see that writers of the New Testament they approach Satan as one who's ready to pounce, kind of like with Cain. Sin is crouching at the door. It's ready to pounce on you. This is 1 Peter 5-8. It says, "Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another." Okay, right there. That's the setup. So what's the problem in James? James is like, you all are not walking in grace. It's this, you're creating who's better than who's wealthier, and you're using your tongues to just put each other in its place, and you have allowed Satan into your midst. So Peter says, hey, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So James and Peter are quoting the same passages here. And then he says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. So there's an active force wanting to use your pride to get into the congregation. And when you think about slander, gossip, the tongue being used inappropriately, it's all based upon pride. And the opposite of that is humility, right? A couple other passages. I'll just read these out quickly just for the sake of time. But you have 2 Corinthians 2:10 and 11. It says, anyone whom you forgive, I also forgive. Indeed, what I have forgiven, if I have forgiven anything, has been for your sake in the presence of Jesus, so that we would not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. So Paul is connecting unforgiveness, which is, to not forgive someone is another issue of pride, unforgiveness to the designs of Satan. So Satan somehow is, and again, we don't really understand. It's kind of like they don't really want us to know how it works, because we have our job to keep it out. That's the way I kind of walk away with this, Doug. It's like, I'm not quite sure how Satan's designs work, because Paul doesn't tell you, but he tells you how to keep them out. Like, you don't want them in. And you can tell the evidences of when Satan's at work in there, because what are they doing? They're not forgiving one another. They're slandering one another. They're gossiping. They're bitter. They're fighting.
Yeah, it's the works of the flesh in Galatians, enmity, strife, jealousy,
That's right.
fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions. And those works of the flesh are directly opposed to the works of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit. Joy, patience, all those things.
And good Reformed people will say, well, that's just your flesh. It's like, yeah, I agree. It is your flesh. And if it's not controlled by the Spirit, somehow Satan uses your flesh to get into the church. Like, it's not one or the other. It's both, right? It's you not walking by the Spirit, walking in the flesh, somehow opens up a gateway, a doorway to allowing this kind of stuff in. Ephesians 4:26 and 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let your sun go down on your anger, and give an opportunity to the devil. Again, it doesn't tell us what that looks like, other than I think you can see the evidences of it, because if you're being angry and you're bickering and fighting, you can say, all right, we've allowed Satan into our midst. A couple of other passages, and I know you've got some, Doug. This is 1 Timothy 5:13 through 15. This is just more about, okay, what can cause problems in a congregation. He's talking about widows who are young and really have nothing to do on their hands. He says, besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have the younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander, for some have already strayed after Satan. Look, these are people, he's saying, these are widows in the church who have actually strayed after Satan. Again, I think what he means by that is that they are doing these things. They are busybodies and gossips. So to be a busybody and gossip is to follow the snare of the adversary. And then here he's even warning us about making sure that we have the right and proper men in place. This is 2 Timothy chapter 2. Verse 23 and following, have nothing to do with foolish or ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. So you'll notice these are all kind of the manifestations of the fruits of the Spirit. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they may come to their senses, escaping from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. Well, what is the will? It's all of these things he just named about foolish controversies, things that divide the church. So it's like, I don't know how many 6 passages we have now, Doug, 7. A lot of these from Paul. You got Peter, James, and Paul. So it's not just James. You got Peter, James, and Paul. You have even in Acts 5 where it talks about Satan entering in their heart. So Ananias and Sapphira are supposed to be doing something good for the church, and they end up deceiving the church, which is not good for the fellowship of the church. So the strongest language is saying of these passages, and there's more. I think that's enough. I think people are getting the point. The strongest language is that the divisiveness in a congregation, when it's being caused by us and our flesh, is saying we didn't stand in the strength of the Lord. We didn't humble ourselves and go after God's grace. We went after our flesh instead, and we fell to the snares and the temptation of Satan. We allowed him to come into our midst. We allowed him to come into our congregation. And I think that's why a lot of churches don't feel safe. And we'll get into that next episode. So that's kind of the premise of what I brought in my sermon. And the thing that shocked me, Doug, and I'll throw this back over to you, was that, you and I, I've been pastoring for a little bit of time. You've been pastoring as long as Moses. And so you've seen... But in the 20 plus, let's see, I've been preaching for 26 years now. And in that time period, I haven't really seen any wild stories, like I would if I guess on certain mission fields. I haven't seen wild stories about demonic activity in our church. But now I look back and I can say, man, there's been a lot of demonic activity in churches that I have participated in, like a lot. If I'm using these standards, he's come in and caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. And it's really changed my perspective to think about how is it we keep these things out of our church, because it's not just sinful issues, it's sinful issues, and you're bringing in a whole entire realm that is opposing the kingdom that you're supposed to be promoting.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great point. Why is this connected to the devil and Satan? I want to just think about the 2 words there for a minute, because devil, the word is diabolos. And actually, sometimes there's a couple places in the New Testament where diabolos refers to humans,
3.
not just Satan.
Yeah, Paul does it 3 times.
That word means a slanderer.
Slanderer, yep.
The very meaning of the main term that we use for this creature, devil, has to do with the tongue. So this is somebody who throws charges across the room, falsely accusing other people, slandering their name and their reputation, knowing full well what they are doing. Think about how it says that Satan is a liar and the father of lies. It's more tongue language, isn't it? And this is exactly what I think James is getting at. And then you have Revelation and the idea of Satan. He's the accuser of our brothers. The word Satan means an accuser. We find that all the way back in Job. From my point of view, a member of the divine council. And in that case, it's a legal law court thing, and he's accusing them. And I think it's the same thing in Revelation. He tries to accuse them day and night before our God, but he no longer has the legal authority to do that because of the gospel. But that doesn't stop him. It doesn't stop him from accusing them or accusing us before, in our own minds that we're not worthy of grace. We're not worthy of grace, that we're still sinful. We are still sinful. He accuses us. He doesn't have a legal foothold, but that's what he does. And that's how he gets us defeated. And I think it's also how he gets us to start turning on each other. Literally, the main words that we use for this guy all deal with the tongue. And so why in the world would it surprise us to find the New Testament linking those kinds of sins that are so diabolical directly with him.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. It's sobering to me. It is definitely the prayer. It's like, for instance, I'll end with this one, and then I will definitely go to your Old Testament stuff because you got me intrigued. And we're at 35. We're at 30 minutes. So, okay, I don't think it's of accident when the disciples come to Jesus and they say, "Hey, teach us to pray like you." And so, how does he end that prayer? Like the last thing you say before you end your time in this daily habit, which I think is an amazing habit to have, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Why? Because we don't want to be harboring things against each other as sinners, because we are. And it's not that there aren't debts. That's the thing, Doug, is that there are debts. It's not like, oh, there's no pain and problems in the church. No, there are pain and problems in the church. He says, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And here's the key. This is why I want to get to it. And deliver us from temptation, right? And then some translations say, and deliver us from the evil one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Why would it end with deliver us from the evil one?
This is important
right
because
before.
Some will say deliver us from evil, but this is an adjective, okay? So it can act as a noun in this case, substantival adjective. Deliver us from literally the evil, paneru. Deliver us from the evil one. And so, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world because we're not to be led into temptation. James himself says we're not led into temptation by God. God doesn't tempt anyone. But,
right.
We're taken away each because of our own evil desire. And then that desire is used by the devil to bring us ultimately into sin. And so, yeah, the Lord's Prayer itself ends on delivering us from the devil himself. And of course, Jesus would know better than anyone about the slanderous, lying tongue of the devil who had just used Scripture itself in the most supernatural of all Psalms. Psalm, 91 or whatever,
yeah, right.
where he uses it against Jesus. Like, it's the most ironic, crazy thing that the devil does there in order to try and get Jesus to sin using more words. In this case, it's actually the words of God himself, taken in some way, actually even in context. Just the timing of it is wrong. It's the eschatological component of it that you will get all the kingdoms of the world, Jesus, but I want you to have them now. And Jesus is like, no, I'm going to go ahead and wait on that because I've read the whole book.
That's right. So it's interesting that you say that. You have the two interactions with Jesus. The one in Luke, I think, is the most fascinating. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. It's like, it's interesting. It's that Jesus's own theology comes out there, is that the adversary is going to be here for a while. And I prayed that your faith would remain strong through that. That means that they're like, one of the founders of our faith, one of the founders, the first apostles to start the church. And then you have Matthew. And it's interesting how fast Peter's mind is manipulated. And we'll get into this a little bit next week for sure. And Peter took him aside. This is after Jesus is talking about he's going to die, to rebuke him, saying, far be it, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. And I do think it's interesting that the translators here did capitalize Satan, not just an adversary, but almost to be speaking like your influence, because he says, you're hindering me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And so I think there is an essence of, this is the sifting I'm talking about, man. He's coming after you. Your faith in me is what you need to be focusing on, not necessarily the kingdom or whatever the earthly solutions that you think that you have. And so it's not uncommon to see that Satan is going after individuals, going after scenarios where he's trying to use the sinful side of them to oppose what Jesus is doing. So you have Peter, who's like, top 3 guys coming after Jesus, and Jesus has to say, "This is what I'm talking about. Get behind me." It's not funny, but to me it's funny. Okay, man. Enough.
Old Testament. Let me give you some of the more interesting ones. This is one of my favorite ones that we've actually talked about this on the Reformed Fringe before, Proverbs 30, 15, and 16. This deals with something called the leech. Okay. And the leech in Hebrew is aluka. And the luka is a vampiric creature. So there's actually kind of a monster. If you want to take it most literally, this word appears in the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, has an entire entry on it. So this vampiric creature has 2 daughters, and they say, "Give, give." It's their speech. It's their tongue. And 3 things are never satisfied, and 4 that never say enough. And then when you go over to the Septuagint of the next verse, which are the 4 things. So it goes 2, 3, 4. That's a kind of a typical proverb thing to do. It gives 4 things. This is the Greek: Hades, and then Eros, and then Tartarus, and then Gaia. 4 gods. One is the underworld. All of them are, actually 2 of them are the underworld, Hades and Tartarus. And then
right.
Dealing with passion and lust, and then dealing with earthly things. It's all put into a mythological sort of language to go along with that vampiric creature, the aluka. And the whole point of this, it's what we didn't really talk about before because we were more interested in how this is just talking about things we've never noticed before that are supernatural, but it's directly related, John, to the tongue. This proverb is connecting the insatiable appetite of the tongue directly to Hades and Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld.
Interesting.
And then to lust, and then to earthly things, Gaia. And it's putting it in that supernatural perspective for the Greek-speaking people of, the late 1st century BC and then onward into the New Testament. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, okay, so there are those whose teeth are swords, whose fangs are knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, the needy from among mankind.
So, this is the proverb, and I believe that this and some of these other passages in Proverbs are exactly where James is getting it from. He's not making this stuff up. He's getting it from the scripture. Now, he's creating it in a new way for new people and putting it in New Testament terms. Nevertheless, the same ideas, the same furniture that he's using is here in the Old Testament. Proverbs 16, 27 and 28. A worthless man digs up evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. Did we not read James say almost exactly like that? And then James directly ties this to hell.
Yeah, that is crazy. I'm still kind of still fascinated by the whole
Aluka thing is super interesting. Let's do a couple more early in the Proverbs. Now, this is dealing with the prostitute, the foolish woman, right, versus the wise woman. So Proverbs sets up these 2 different women that are opposites. Honey, this is Proverbs 5 through 5. Honey drips from the lips of the prostitute. So it's dealing with her mouth, the foolish woman. But afterward, it is bitterer than gall. And the feet of folly lead those who deal with her down with death into hell. Now, I say hell. If you read it in your Bible, it will say Sheol. But Sheol is always translated as Hades. And Hades is always translated into English as hell. So,
yeah, Sheol's isn't that a transliteration?
Sheol is a transliteration, right? They're refusing to actually translate it. You can translate it as underworld. Or the grave
they literally
whatever,
just put the Hebrew English word
Hades
there.
tells you exactly what it is. It's much better. Proverbs 7:27. Her house is the way of hell. leading down to the chambers of death. Proverbs 9:18. This one's really interesting. The simpleton does not know that the earthborn or mighty ones, the Gibborim and Rephaim, perish with her, and he meets a trap or a snare of hell. Folly's invitation lands the hearer in the snares of hell. It's the invitation. It's the words. The spoken words lead them into hell. Proverbs 2:18, for she has set her house near death and her paths near hell with the Rephaim. Again, the same kind of an idea. The house and the paths of the strange woman lead you to hell. Proverbs 1:11 through 12. Sinners, the sinner's invite. Come with us. Let us swallow him alive like hell. So their speech proposes an action that is compared to being swallowed by hell. I mean, you can just keep going on and on with these sorts of things.
Yeah, no
because there's a lot of
kidding.
Hades language that's going on in Proverbs. And what I'm trying to point out here is that when you have, and the reason that Rephaim texts are so interesting is because, as those who listen to this show know, the Rephaim, when they die, become the unclean spirits of the New Testament, which we call demons. And so when you've got doctrines of demons and you've got any kind of language that we've seen associating the tongue directly with demonic activity or with satanic activity, devilish activity, it's all related to the same underworld horrors that we think about in horror movies with people that are possessed. You think about possession movies and what demons do in those movies, right? They start speaking and then they start lying. And then they start telling the truth about things they shouldn't know. And they do it in Latin, or they do it in, Akkadian or Babylonian, all these crazy languages that they've known because they've been around for thousands of years. And all of that is an attempt to manipulate both the person who's being possessed and the one trying to exorcise the demon so that ultimately it can continue to stay and wreak its havoc. So, I'm bringing this up because I want people to know that when the New Testament is talking about these kinds of things, it's not coming from thin air. They're not just hearing some magical word from God and writing it down like you get with the Quran and divine inspiration. They know what the scripture says, and they're applying the Old Testament directly to our situation that we're talking about with regard to how speech is so destructive in the church. And, think about even a divine council scene like 1 Kings 22:19 through 23, where after the divine council kind of is set up, it says, who will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets? And one says one thing, another says another, one goes, I'll do it. And so it's false, deceptive speech that leads the king into destruction. Exactly what the Proverbs say, exactly what the New Testament is saying, that when we behave the way that people behave, when they gossip and they slander and they say things about people that they have no business saying, when they even are sitting there, talking like little birdies, trying to get the gossip and the juice. Like, it's all of that is circulating around hell itself, John. And we don't stop to think about that because we're just inquisitive and I just want to know what's going on with so-and-so. But how often do people do that kind of stuff where they file it away so that they can use it against a person later on? It's absolutely horrific stuff. And it's nothing to joke about.
Yeah.
It's nothing to sneeze about.
No.
It's something to take extremely seriously. And I think that when you put this kind of a cap on it with this particular sin, man, all of a sudden, maybe it should start to make it feel like some of the other sins that we like to talk a lot more about, that we like to say, well, those are really evil. I don't behave that way because this is the kind of thing, that Paul uses in his list in Romans 1. He goes for the big sins first, right? And then he goes, oh, and they're gossips.
Right.
Oh, and they disobey their parents. Because he starts to, he's cast the net, and now he's going to pick everybody up in it with this kind of a sin. Because we are all guilty of it. Because like you said, to start off this whole thing, nobody can tame their tongue. And the only thing that can stop this kind of satanic evil from overcoming a church is the grace of God as it's proclaimed in the gospel, and for people to actually believe, first of all, that the gospel's for them only because they are worthless, because they do participate in this. That they need to recognize in that gospel message that the proclamation is that you're not worthy. You are somebody who does exact same things. That's what Paul ends Romans 1 with. You who judge others, you're guilty of doing the very same things. Right? And so the grace of God can only hit a person who first recognizes that, yep, I am that person. And then it's the grace of God that leads us to actually change our behavior when that's then brought together with the law, which is in some ways what we're dealing with in this whole show. Stop doing that.
That's right.
The law, the only reason that we would ever want to stop doing that is because we recognize that we've been saved from it.
That's right. Amen. Yeah, well, before we close this down, I think it's interesting, Doug, that if I came to you and I was like, dude, I can't believe this. I've got congregants who are practicing sorcery in the foyer. You'd be like, what? What? Sorcery? Dude, you better get on that. But if I came to you and said, man, I got congregants who are practicing gossip in the foyer. Like, oh, that's not good.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Listen to how Paul treats it, though. Now, the works of the flesh, Galatians 5:19, if you want to check me on this. Now, the works of the flesh are evident. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, adultery, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of rage, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. You would feel like some of those don't fit. You're like, well, I don't know, man. Like, idolatry and sorcery seem like the big uns. But yet in that list, he has dissensions and divisions and envy. And that's the thing that I think it's, Paul only mentions sorcery like twice in the New Testament. He says, adding to the gospel is, what did he say? That
Galatians
witchcraft.
3.
And then in Galatians 5, he says sorcery. And you would think that's where all the passages are, like, stop bringing sorcery into the church. He's saying you're bringing Satan in the church not through sorcery. You're bringing it in through your mouth. So the whole point of this podcast, to sum it up, and I'll throw it over to you, Doug, is that you're going to need a power far bigger than Satan to handle this. That's the point, and that's what the next episode's going to be about, because the law says we shouldn't do this, but the law doesn't tell you how not to. It just tells you not to. We're going to talk about how not to and where it comes from and how to deal with it.
Excellent way to transition us into part 2. We're going to have that, as I said at the beginning, over on Theocast, kind of doing double duty for both of us. We're both pastors. We spend a lot of time, pastoring and dealing with this kind of things that we're talking about even in the episode today. And so it's always good when we can combine our work together and try and help people like you as we're doing our programs. This is the Reformed Fringe. Hopefully you've seen that we're trying to put a little bit of the fringe into the Reformed today and a little bit of Reformed into the fringe, trying to give some good, solid theology. If you haven't and you'd like to be a part of a community that talks about these kinds of things, come on over to reformedfringe.com and check us out. I think you'll enjoy it. We thank you for listening to the program. If you would like, it helps us if you subscribe, if you like our shows. Everybody says that on every episode of everything they ever do on YouTube. The reason why is because it's actually true. So if you would do that, if you'd be kind enough, leave some comments, do whatever you like, and we'll see you next time on the Reformed Fringe.